At the end of Q3 of last year, we took on a social media marketing agency client, and they were doing around $22,000 per month. And it's sort of our standard procedure at 7 to audit all of the companies that we work with and that come in as new clients. That's the point of this video today is I'm just going to share the findings of the audit, what we did, what we shifted, and yeah, let's get into it. So they were making around 22K a month. And they had an 18-month track record. And on the surface, this business looked pretty healthy. They had a 1.5x ROAS. The founder genuinely thought they had a lead gen problem. And that's something I see all the time. It's such a, frustrating thing is that everyone online in the service business, in the courses, info, consulting, all of them try to boil down the problems to, oh, you have a lead generation problem, or, oh, you have a delivery problem and you need to productize it. It's like those aren't always the problems, and this example is a testament to that. The founder thought they were one creative tweak away on their ads from achieving mass scale, getting more leads, getting more clients. We didn't even need to look at their ads. We just reconstructed the economic system, right? Their economics of the business. And it was a clear structural failure. So the agency sold a 2K a month retainer where clients would stay on average for 5.8 months, which means they would collect around $11,600 over the lifetime. Obviously, against this number, aggressive acquisition would appear justified. Spending a couple $1,000s to acquire a 11,000 LTV client. So after paying contractor labor, software costs, and the founder's time, it costed them $1,620 per month to service each client. So after collecting $2,000 and then you subtract the actual cost of fulfillment, you get a contribution margin of $380, which is equivalent to 19%. So over a 5.8 month lifetime, the actual economic value of each client was not $11,600. It was actually $2,204. And you get that number by multiplying these two. At this 19%, the business pretty much had no buffer. They had no room for error. Below 30 or 35%, paid acquisition is pretty much a risk amplifier. So even modest variance in churn or acquisition costs basically turns break even into an economic loss. This is really where the model gets deceptive. So at that revenue level, the unit economics look pretty healthy enough to justify scale. But the cost to get a customer is never stable. It changes based on the platform you're using or the competition, or sometimes we even see it in the season. CAC and LTV are glorified metrics. We like to look at contribution margin first before we even look at these two because it determines whether these two numbers are even safe to optimize. And contribution margin answers one question. So after a single sale, does this business actually get stronger or weaker? And so the agency was spending $24,000 over 90 days to acquire 9 clients. They had a CAC of 2,667. And you would think against that revenue LTV of roughly 11,600, it appears pretty sustainable at first. And a founder looking at top line LTV would reasonably conclude the system works. But the failure only becomes visible when the CAC is compared to the economic LTV. So given this cost of acquisition, the 2,667 at a $2,204 lifetime contribution margin, the business was basically reinvesting all of the profit, over 100% of the profit, into money that it didn't have yet to acquire the next customer. So it really concludes that the failure was variance combined with the timing, where the CAC, the cost of acquisition, is paid pretty much instantly. But the contribution margin of $380 was amortized and collected slowly over the 5.8 months. So they're basically banking that the average client would stay this long. The asymmetry means that the firm had to front nearly all acquisition costs before even knowing whether a client would even survive long enough to repay it. And at a 7-month payback with a 5.8 month average lifetime, this model only worked if everything went right, where they didn't have any churn, ad cost spikes, or delivery overruns. And what this is a survival bet. This isn't a growth model at all. So what did we do? We had to initiate a stop order for their ads. It was mathematically necessary. Otherwise, the firm would have to essentially go and outsource capital and take out loans to fuel the cost of acquisition, the ads, right? Just to acquire an economic LTV of $2,204, effectively operating in the red $400. And not even banking on they were going to collect the $380 consistently over that average lifetime. So we had to stop the system, right? So continuing acquisition under these conditions would have converted accounting profit into pure cash losses. So we paused all ads immediately because growth literally became the biggest risk to the business. So what did we do? We had to shift the model from doing more work to essentially providing the answers. Like, as you know, social media marketing companies basically just like create the content, they run the ads, they do a bunch of the content marketing focused stuff as a service. We had to replace the $2,000 monthly retainer with a $12,000 growth diagnostic. Now, I'll explain why this fixed the business. How did this fix the business? So they needed less volume and they got more cash for it. Because we charged this $12,000 up front, we needed 80% less or fewer sales to make the same money, which meant we could actually stop spending as much on ads. And it also gave us higher profit margins. So by removing a lot of the heavy lifting, so we weren't like managing different accounts or basically being ad hoc to every single client, a lot of the expenses pretty much vanished. Margins ended up jumping over 80%. I think it was like 83%, almost instantaneously. And there's also lower risk in this offer and this market positioning. Now, a retainer is a long-term promise that's incredibly hard to keep. A diagnostic, being a 4-week project with a clear end date, effectively capped the risk for the agency and gave the client exactly what they actually needed, which was basically a clear plan for whether the business could even scale. So what did we do? We moved from this model that created more stress to a model where clarity created more profit. And so in order to charge this, we had to identify where the value was even being destroyed. And a lot of it was the execution. The execution of their SMMA service model exposed the agency to a lot of the client failures. So when a client's model was broken, the agency absorbed a lot of the blame and the churn. So not nicely said, the agency's clients had pretty shitty offers and pretty shitty economics of their business. So when they didn't get results, they basically churned and blamed our client that it was their fault that they weren't getting results when their economics weren't sound and nothing was validated in their market. So we had to move our client's offer upstream to the highest leverage point that they already had access to, which we concluded was decision clarity. The deliverables that our client had for their clients was like a churn diagnosis. They did offer redesign, and then they also did a lot of social media strategy, specifically for business owners to get them more views that are higher converting for their offer. And then they also did a lot of like paid acquisition stuff. It was primarily strategy for paid acquisition, so they could validate and test creatives before they even launched for specific offers within market segmentations. So what this did was it capped downside and also decreased the fulfillment time, where the outcome was a lot more of clarity and strategy and not just performance, which made delivery finite and expectations pretty precise. Within the first 60 days, the firm ended up selling 3 diagnostics. Acquisition spend dropped to basically $4,000 per month, not because demand pretty much disappeared, but because the new unit required far fewer sales to produce the same cash. They literally went from 19% margin to 83%. Spend went from $8K a month down to $4K. In cash velocity, instead of being amortized monthly, it was collected completely upfront for $12,000. And we validated this model using 3 metrics, and this is really important. So we did it based on cash collected upfront, the delivery hours per dollar earned, as well as the consistency of the outcomes, of their client outcomes. So after the 3 diagnostics with 0 delivery creep, we considered the unit validated. I love doing these audits. I think it's really interesting to see like the decision logic where everyone and their mother thinks that they just need more leads, need a better delivery or productized delivery. They need to sell courses. They need to do they need to restructure services. They need to delegate and hire more people and do some arbitrage model. It's like looking at the logic that we just went through this audit, we were able to conclusively say that they needed to shift to the highest leverage point because the math didn't make sense. And they already had access to the decision clarity. But one of the most important things was that they already had the skill set to be able to provide that decision clarity for their future clients. And that is one of the most important things, is that they had the confidence. They had the 18-month runway of knowing what the hell they're doing. And this is why strategy is so important, because like a lot of people just don't know what they need. They think they know what they need, but they don't. And then once you run through the numbers, everything starts to make sense.